Well, now we move on to a very important section of the DVD, where I'm going to try to get you used to the idea that decisions made in the opening and the middle game can have a significant impact on the end game, and that you should go in with your eyes open. Don't play opening variations which lead to a bad end game unless you've got a very good idea of why you're playing them. And to illustrate this, my first example was an extremely good one. It comes from, in fact, a simultaneous display played in 2010 between a grandmaster, Henrik Danielsen from Denmark, playing with the white pieces, and somebody called Sherrington Amarapala, whose grade's only 1694. And in fact, this game will show a clear gulf in understanding between the two players. And it really does highlight how important it is to go in with your eyes open when you play in a certain way in the opening. Now, in fact, the opening of this game could not be more normal. In fact, it's the Rye Lopez, one of the most common openings of all at every level of chess. The Rolls Royce of chess openings. White brings his bishop out to b5 to put sustained pressure on black's position. And black decides to play a6. Let's not forget the grandmaster is white in this simultaneous display. And now Danielsen plays bishop takes c6, the exchange variation. Again, very, very common. But a good technical player can use this opening to win lots of games with the white pieces. Now, white is already setting up good endgame positions, and Danielsen's next move is a clear indication that he wants to win this game clearly on technique. He plays d4. This line isn't supposed to give white very much, as the queens are exchanged at an early point in the game, but Danielsen knows what he's doing. He's going into this with a clear head. Basically, he understands that king and pawn endings are actually lost for black in this position, because white's got a 4-3 majority in the centre and on the king side. White can create a passed pawn using this majority. Now, if we consider the other side of the board, we will see that black has a 4-3 majority on the queen side. The difference between the two majorities is that black cannot create a passed pawn if white plays correctly when black starts advancing his pawns. So white's got the general game plan here of angling for exchanges, playing it safe, playing carefully, gradually advancing those pawns on the king side, and creating winning endgames. Black for his part, and after that introduction you'd wonder why black should ever go for this position, black has two nice bishops. Black in this position generally tries to keep the pieces on, he tries to play aggressively, and in particular he tries to use his bishop pair to good effect. The bishop that white doesn't have is a light square bishop, so black might be looking to work up light square play as we go on through the game. Practice has shown that black is easily able to do this, and this is in fact a very balanced position. But when you see this game, you wouldn't think so. White seems to win very routinely. So it's all about playing this position actively, keeping the pieces on with black. So the next move is okay. Amarapala brings the knight out to f6. White easily defends the pawn, black attacks the knight, and white moves his knight back to e2. Very solid indeed. Black plays h6, keeping the bishop out of g5. Again, I've got no quibble with that. And white plays knight bc3. Black plays b6, and white plays bishop f4. So, the thing about this position is that black's falling behind in development. White is already starting to create meaningful threats. White's developing rapidly. White's attacking this pawn on c7. And there's a nice easy upcoming plan here for white of castling on the queen side, maybe rook to d2, rook hd1, and then on with the game. This is exactly the type of plan a grandmaster likes to have at his disposal in a simultaneous display, because first of all he's going around very quickly, and secondly black's got to immediately cope with this threat. So Amarapala decides to play c6, but that is quite an ugly move, and white continues to press ahead with development, castles on the queen side. So bishop to e7. Alright, white could play rook d2 in this position. He decides to play g4. And black makes yet another pawn move here, a5. Why did he do this? Well, I think black wants to make some gestures on the queen side towards the white king, but he's not remedying the biggest problem with this position. He's falling behind in development. Maybe also black was seeing moves like knight a4, and he thought, well, this is the only way I'm going to defend my pawn. I want to play a move like rook a6. It's difficult to find real reasons why black should play a5 as opposed to developing a piece here. White just proceeds serenely on with his plan, gaining space on the king side with h4. Okay, black plays the bishop out to e6. White's knight comes into g3, and black plays the pawn up to c4. And now, white starts to open up the game. He creates what we call a pawn lever against black's position, and he uses this lever to open up the position. Black takes. I don't like that move. And I'll tell you the reason why, is that it's because it promotes exchanges. It's a plan of advancing the king side pawns. This is what white wants in this position. So whatever black does in this position, he's got to try to create active play and to avoid exchanges. Ace takes g5, well, that just encourages exchanges, because as you can see now, black's got to take on h1, and now the white rook gets a highway all the way into black's camp and forces black to go into a pin. Not exactly what one would want. Bishop d6. White's got no problem with exchanges in this position. He knows he's better. He wants to win this game simply. He's happy to chop all the pieces off and to go into a king and pawn ending where he would have a fairly standard win. Black castles on the queen side. Bishop takes f8. Rook takes f8. Very meek and mild. Rook takes f8 check. Knight takes f8. And now white starts to identify targets in the black camp. He attacks the pawn on g7. Black moves forward, fair enough, and the white knight finds an extremely nice square on f6. And now left to his own devices, white is just going to unhurriedly move his king up into the position and gradually get those kingside pawns rolling. Ultimately, white will look to play f4, f5, but not before he's improved the position of his pieces first. Knight d7. Again, perhaps black felt that was exchanged. That exchange was forced upon him because the knight on f8 has no squares. But that just shows the bankruptcy of what black has done in terms of strategical play in the earlier moves. So knight d7, again, white's play is very simple here. He just chops off the knight. Black is even able to bring up the king. White brings his king up. Black plays king e5. And now I'm sure one of the candidate moves which white was considering was f4. But white can always play that move. And perhaps he won't always be able to play this probing move here, knight a4. And that's the move Danielson preferred. Direct attack on the pawn at b6. And when the pawn advances, white moves his knight in again to a beautiful square on c5. The white knight is the boss in this position, and the black bishop is completely ineffectual. Note, both of white's pieces are on dark squares out of range of the black bishop. So black plays c3. He's trying for a trick. White blocks the queen side. Black plays b4. And now knight to b7. I think white was going to do something like this, however black played. But what happened was rather drastic. As black completely overlooked white's major threat, he played a4. Well, whatever black plays, white's going to get that pawn. But a4 is catastrophic, and out of nowhere, white fashions an elegant mate. f4 checkmate. But black had been much worse for quite some time. Now, that was a pretty routine win by a grandmaster. But to win like that requires consummate skill and a development of endgame technique built up over many years. What Danielson realised was that basically he could afford to exchange at virtually any time. He went into that variation with open eyes, knowing that most endgames were good for him, so he had a clear game plan before he even started. Black didn't have any game plan. He seemed to meander through that game. He allowed the pieces to be exchanged. He never got active, and That was basically why he lost. Grandmaster technique at its best.